Hello everyone, my name is Lorena Bichili. Today I'm going to be presenting for environmental management, Mr. Espinosa's period 7. I also want to mention that if I look at the screen, it's because I'm usually going to be looking over here so I can think. But if I'm looking at the screen directly, it's because I want to see like what I'm talking about. So we're going to start with chapter 1.1, which was basic geography. So you have your 7 continents, which are Antarctica, Oceania, South America, North America, Asia, Europe. I'm missing one. I'm gonna start again. Antarctica, Oceania, North America, South America, Africa, Europe, and Asia. There. Those are the 7 continents. I also want to mention one very interesting thing. For some reason, I had the idea that Australia itself was its own continent, but it's not. It's actually called Oceania, and it contains like New Zealand, the Fiji, the Guinea Islands, I think they're called, and Australia, but it's its own continent. And you also have the 5 oceans. So you have the Southern Ocean, the Arctic Ocean, the Indian Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and the Atlantic Ocean. There, 5 oceans. Then you also have the divisions of the globe. You have the vertical division, which is the prime meridian, and then you have the horizontal division, which is the equator. And usually the climate around the equator tends to be a lot hotter. Not tends to be, it is a lot hotter. Like, those are like the tropical climates, kind of like Cuba, Florida. It's very hot places, like South America too. Then we're going to talk about 1.2, which is, I forgot what the lesson itself is called, but basically it focuses more on the economy of countries. It talks about high income countries, low income countries, middle income countries. Is based on the GNI, which is the gross national income of the country, and that's just how much money the businesses and the people of that country make. Low income countries would be Cuba. I don't know what other low income country. I can't think of one, but middle income countries, India, Jamaica. High income countries, Puerto Rico, the United States, Australia, Canada. Yeah. I think that's it for that chapter. Oh, there's also the World Bank. The World Bank basically was made after World War II, I think it was to stabilize the country again, but not here. Just in general, it was created to stabilize the economy again, and now it just serves to reduce poverty. So 1.3. 1.3 was sustainability. So 1.3 covers sustainability, which is just creating, I want to say conditions because that's what I say on the lessons, but it's basically that. Or systems. It's not systems. Creating things that can last for our generation and for future generations while still being in harmony with nature. In harmony meaning that like we're not damaging nature or overusing resources. Like, for example, something that's not sustainable is overfishing. Overfishing causes a lot of damage. Over 1 billion people around 1 billion people depend on fish as like their main source of protein and food. Not food, just protein. But basically they depend on fish, and overfishing causes imbalance in fish ecosystems, not fish ecosystems, ocean ecosystems. And basically, because of the imbalance, there's going to be less food for the consumers, which means that there's going to be less consumers, and it just causes this whole imbalance within that ecosystem, which means that there's going to be less fish for people to eat, and like that. And now it leads for a problem for people, because people cause their own problem. So what after that? Also, sustainability is something that's very important. I think if people were used more, that's what I was gonna say. sustainable sources of energy. If people begin to use more sustainable sources of energy, especially developed countries like the United States, where we are just developed countries set basically the pace for everybody else. So if developed countries begin to use more sustainable energy and we set that as a standard, it'll be easier for other countries to catch up with that instead of using cheaper sources of energy like fossil fuels or coal, things like that are not sustainable. And sustainable sources of energy would be like wind, solar energy, like that, like the solar panels that they put above the houses. That's sustainable energy. Next, we're doing 1.4, which is the water cycle. Water cycle, it's basically the movement of water on Earth, kind of. So you have precipitation. Precipitation is rain. It doesn't have to be rain. It could be snow, hail, things like that. It comes from clouds, obviously. So precipitation is part of the water cycle. There's also, after that is, because there's condensation, precipitation, and evaporation. Evaporation is when liquid water becomes gas or water vapor, and then condensation would be when water vapor becomes liquid. There, I got it. There's also other things within the water cycle that I didn't include in the presentation, which are more like detailed, I guess. So there's runoff, which is basically when there's like too much water and it runs off. It's self-explanatory. There's also, I think it's called, I forgot the name of it, but what was it? I have it in my head. Basically, it's when the water goes into caves and it stays there. It goes into caves through like rocks and stuff. Okay, well, moving on. 1.5. 1.5 is the atmosphere. You have the troposphere, stratosphere, and the mesosphere. The troposphere is the warmest layer. It's closest to Earth. There's 5 layers, but we're only focusing on 3 for the class. So you have the troposphere. The troposphere, as I said, is the warmest one. As you go up in the atmosphere, it gets colder and colder. It gets away from Earth, obviously. So you start with the troposphere. It's the one closest to Earth. The warmest one. That's where weather happens, climate, everything like that. And then after that one is the stratosphere. The stratosphere contains the ozone layer, which is what absorbs radiation from the sun. It heats the atmosphere on Earth. But that's the stratosphere. What else? Ozone layer. Yeah. It has its abundance in ozone. It has an ozone layer. That's what it's called. And then the mesosphere. The mesosphere, there's not a lot of research on it as much as with the other layers. It's because it's not as easily accessible to researchers. But they do know that that's where the meteors burn up, that area of the mesosphere. Then 1.6, we go to the the ecosystems. So within that lesson, we learn about niche, which is the role of a specific animal. Then you also have a community. A community is very... Oh, no, actually, I'm going to explain species first. A species is just the same animal. Like, a tiger is a species. A human, it's a species. Like that. A dog is a species. Cat, like that. That's a species. It's the same animal. And then you have communities, which contains different species living in one place. And then you have an ecosystem, which focuses more on the relationship, you could say. The relationship between those animals, like the consumers, producers, like that, predators, prey. That is an ecosystem. And then you also have a biome, which is... No, not a biome. My bad. I'm sorry. My apologies. It's not a biome. It's a habitat. An animal's natural habitat. It's their natural home. Like, a tiger's natural habitat is the jungle. And then an orangutan's habitat, yeah. Habitat would be also a jungle, a rainforest. Oh, and then you have biomes, which is like different regions, I guess you could say. They're usually bigger regions. It could cover like the tundra, rainforest, like that tropical rainforest. It covers bigger regions of the place. And then after that, we're gonna cover chapter 3.1, which focuses on populations. So you have human populations pyramids, where it tells you whether a population is growing, declining, or stable. Growing populations tend to be like a pyramid shape where they get bigger at the bottom. That's where the younger population is, because you're growing, so more people being born. And the declining population is the opposite. It's like higher at the top and lower at the bottom because it's declining in people. There's less birth rates, less people being born. And there's a stable population, which is what it says, stable. So it's neither declining significantly or growing significantly. A growing population usually relates to, it has higher birth rates. Usually it's in countries where there's lower education, like where people aren't as educated on contraception, so they tend to, have more children. Sometimes countries just don't have they're low income countries or less developed countries, so they don't have contraception even available. It's not even about the education, they just don't have the resources that they need for that. And lower education. And then higher education countries usually have a declining population because people tend to be more focused on their career, what they're studying, and things like that. They're not as focused on having a family. So it's a declining population. And I could also talk about a country could also have an aging population, which is basically anybody over 65. If they have a higher aging population, like Japan, for example, they tend to have, the government spends more money because they need to pay retired workers, and also there's a lower tax revenue because there aren't as many people paying taxes, because if you're retired, you don't really pay taxes. And so there's a lower tax revenue, and there's a higher dependability ratio, which could also be applied to growing populations. With dependability ratio is calculated with the anyone from basically newborn, so 0 to 14, and anyone over 65. So that's calculated with that. So if those numbers are higher, of those populations, there's a higher dependability ratio, which means that they depend more on the working population. There. What else could I cover? Oh, unchecked growth creates unbalance because there's less food for people, there's more waste. There's more waste, there's less space for people, there's less wealth for people. It just creates a lot of problems, especially, like, for example, countries like China or India, where they have their populations over 1 billion. It tends to create less space for people. It becomes very crowded. Usually that can lead to a lot more pollution as well, because there's more consumerism, there's more people using things. So it creates a lot of problems. Unchecked growth. Okay, I think that's it that I included in the presentation. Oh, wait, I can remember something else. And that's it. That's all I have that I can remember at the moment. Thank you so much for your time.